We build cities for protection. But did we build our own prison? Civilization, we often call it humanity's greatest achievement, right? Think about it. We built sprawling cities from nothing but dust and determination. We established complex laws, governments, and vast economic systems. We invented writing, designed breathtaking architecture, and pushed the boundaries of science and culture. In a relatively short time, we went from scattered, wandering tribes to interconnected, powerful nations. There's no denying that civilization is the blueprint of our modern world. It's the story we tell ourselves about progress, about our unstoppable march forward. But what if that's only half the story? What if, beneath this gleaming narrative of achievement, there's a much deeper, more complicated question we need to ask? What did all this progress truly cost us? Let's rewind the clock. Before the first cities rose, before the first fields were plowed, humans lived a very different life. We were hunter-gatherers, living in small, mobile groups. We followed the seasons, moved with the herds, and were deeply connected to the rhythms of the natural world. Our lives were guided by the environment, not by a king or a clock. We had to be incredibly adaptable, resourceful, and cooperative to survive. There were no permanent rulers, no landlords, no tax collectors. Life was certainly uncertain, filled with daily dangers, but it was also incredibly flexible. It was a life of profound, unfiltered freedom. Then, something changed. A revolution that would alter the course of human history forever. Agriculture. We learned to plant seeds and domesticate animals. For the first time, we didn't have to chase our food, we could grow it. This led to permanent settlements. Villages sprouted where there were once just temporary camps. With surplus food came the ability to store it for the future, to plan ahead. And with stored resources came the concept of ownership. This is my land, this is my grain, this is my own. And slowly, subtly, new systems began to take shape. Systems of control. We built walls to protect our settlements and our stockpiles from outsiders. These walls made people feel safe, secure. We created laws to manage growing populations and resolve disputes. These laws brought a sense of order and predictability. Leaders emerged, promising stability and protection in an uncertain world. But this new security came with a price tag, and the currency was obedience. The more complex society became, the more structured and rigid it grew. To manage thousands, then millions of people, you need organization, you need rules, you need hierarchies. Suddenly, some people were farmers, others were soldiers, some were priests, and a select few were rulers. Social ladders formed, and the gaps between the rungs began to widen. Inequality, once a foreign concept, became an accepted part of life. The freedom to simply walk away, to live differently, began to narrow. You had a role to play, a box to fit into. Civilization promised us protection from the chaos of the wild, a shield against starvation and uncertainty, and in many ways, it delivered. It gave us medicine, art, and the collective knowledge of generations. But in exchange, it placed us inside intricate systems that we, as individuals, cannot easily escape. We are born into nations, economies, and social structures not of our own choosing. We work within them, live within them, and are defined by them. So, the real question isn't whether civilization was a powerful invention. Of course it was. The evidence is all around us, in every skyscraper and satellite. The more profound question is this. As we look at the world we built with all its wonders and all its pressures, its comforts and its cages, are we looking at the pinnacle of human progress, or are we staring at the walls of a beautiful, intricate prison of our own design? What do you think? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. The first topic is life before structure. Have you ever wondered what life was like before cities, before countries, before all the rules and structures we live with today? For hundreds of thousands of years, our ancestors lived a completely different reality, a life of constant movement and deep cooperation. Imagine this, small, tight-knit groups, maybe a few dozen people, always on the move. They were hunter-gatherers. Their world had no borders, no fences, no private property signs. If the berries in one valley ran out, or the herds they followed migrated, the group simply packed up and moved. It was a life dictated by the seasons and the availability of resources. This mobility was their ultimate freedom. Think about it. If you had a serious disagreement with someone in your group, you didn't have to stay and fight. One of you, or even a whole family, could just leave and join another group. There were no kings, no presidents, no permanent bosses. Leadership wasn't a title you inherited. It was something you earned in the moment. The best hunter might lead the hunt, The wisest elder might guide a decision about where to camp next, but their authority was temporary and based purely on their skill and the respect of their peers. Once the task was done, they were just another member of the group. This way of life also created a kind of natural equality. Extreme differences in wealth were virtually impossible. Why? Because you had to carry everything you owned on your back. Everyone had what they needed to survive, and sharing was the default. Hoarding resources would have been not just impractical, but a threat to the group's survival. Your wealth wasn't in what you owned, but in your relationships and your skills. A strong social network was your ultimate safety net. Life was tough, no doubt about it. It was physically demanding, but socially, it was incredibly fluid. There were no prisons to lock people away, no complex tax systems to fund a government, no rigid bureaucracies with endless paperwork, and crucially, no standing armies to enforce the will of a ruler. Your freedom came directly from your ability to walk away. If you didn't like the rules, you could find a new community. But this freedom came at a price. Mobility meant vulnerability. There were no permanent homes to shelter from bitter winters or scorching summers. No grain silos to store food for lean times. If a hunt failed or a drought wiped out the local plants, the group faced real starvation. And while they could walk away from internal conflicts, they had no stone walls or fortifications to protect them from external threats, whether from a rival group or a dangerous predator. It was a life lived on the edge, a delicate balance between absolute freedom and constant risk. So, why did we ever give it up? What could possibly be worth trading this incredible freedom for? The answer lies in one of the most significant inventions in human history: agriculture. It started slowly, perhaps with groups noticing that seeds dropped near their campsites grew into edible plants. They began to experiment, tending to small gardens, encouraging useful plants to grow. This wasn't a sudden revolution. It was a gradual process that unfolded over thousands of years in different parts of the world, independently. In the Fertile Crescent, around 10,000 BC, people started cultivating wheat and barley. In China, it was rice and millet. In the Americas, it was corn, beans, and squash. For the first time, humans could produce their own food instead of just finding it. This was it meant they didn't have to follow migrating herds or constantly search for ripe berries. They could stay in one place. And by staying in one place, they could build more permanent shelters. They could dig wells for a reliable water supply. They could create pottery to store their surplus food. This surplus was the key. For the first time, a community could produce more food than it needed to eat immediately. This surplus was a buffer against hard times. It meant a failed hunt or a bad harvest wasn't an automatic death sentence. It provided a level of security our hunter-gatherer ancestors could only dream of. This newfound stability allowed populations to grow, but this security came with a hidden cost. That surplus, which offered so much safety, also needed to be managed and protected. Who decides how the extra grain is distributed? Who guards it from pests, from rot, and most importantly, from other people? Suddenly, you need rules. You need someone to enforce those rules. You need a system. The very thing that hunter-gatherers didn't have. And with settlement comes a new concept: land ownership. This patch of land is where my family grows its food. It's ours, and we're not moving. The fluid world of the hunter-gatherer was beginning to solidify. As villages grew, new problems emerged that mobile groups never faced. How do you deal with waste when hundreds of people are living in one spot? How do you resolve disputes when you can't just walk away from your neighbor? These challenges required new solutions. They required organization. The second topic is the agricultural shift. Have you ever wondered why we live the way we do? In houses, in cities, with jobs and property, in complex social rules. For most of human history, that wasn't the case. We were enormous wanderers, constantly on the move, following the seasons and the herds. Our existence was a daily gamble. But about 12,000 years ago, something happened that would forever alter the course of our species. A revolution so profound, it's still shaping our world today. It wasn't a war or a new king. It was a seed. This is the story of the agricultural revolution, the single biggest change in human history. Let's rewind the clock. Imagine being a hunter-gatherer. Your life is dictated by the immediate. You're hungry, you hunt, or you forage. Your group is your family, and the world is your pantry. There's no concept of owning the land you walk on. It's a shared resource. You have a deep, intimate knowledge of your environment, every plant, every animal track, every change in the weather. Your life is physically demanding, but it's also, in a way, incredibly free. If resources run low or tensions rise within the group, you can just move. The entire world is your home. But this life had one major drawback: unpredictability. A bad hunt, a failed season of berries, or a sudden drought could spell disaster. Survival was a constant, pressing concern. There was no way to plan for next month, let alone next year. Humanity was living on the edge, day in and day out. This precarious existence set the stage for a radical new idea. What if, instead of just finding food, we could make it? What if we could convince the plants we relied on to grow right where we wanted them? This wasn't a sudden invention. It was a slow, gradual process of observation. Our ancestors noticed that seeds dropped on fertile ground sprouted into new plants. They began to experiment, saving the best seeds from the biggest, tastiest plants and intentionally planting them. They learned to clear land, to till the soil, and to water their precious crops. This was the birth of farming. At the same time, we started a new relationship with animals. Instead of just hunting them, we began to capture and tame them. We realized we could raise sheep for wool and meat, goats for milk, and cattle to help us plow the fields. This was domestication. Together, farming and animal husbandry created a powerful new system. For the first time ever, humans had a degree of control over their food supply. This was revolutionary. Food could be grown consistently. It could be harvested and, crucially, it could be stored. A surplus of grain meant you weren't just eating for today. You were planning for the winter, for a bad harvest, for the future. This newfound predictability was the ultimate security blanket. But this security came at a price, and that price was freedom of movement. Farming is a commitment. You can't just plant a field of wheat and wander off for 6 months. Crops need constant care, weeding, watering, and protection from pests and hungry animals. This commitment tied people to a specific piece of land in a way they had never been before. The nomadic lifestyle began to fade. Why roam when your survival was literally rooted in the ground beneath your feet? People started to build more permanent shelters, which grew into the first villages. And as soon as people became tied to the land, a brand new concept emerged. Ownership. This patch of land isn't just a place we're passing through. It's our patch of land. We cleared it, we planted it, and our lives depend on what it produces. This field is mine, that one is yours. With ownership came the need for boundaries, hedges, fences, stone walls, and wherever you have boundaries, you inevitably get disputes. Who gets the land with the best soil? Who has access to the river for irrigation? These questions needed answers, and those answers required new social structures and rules. The success of agriculture led to another major change. Population growth with a more stable food source. More children survived to adulthood, and communities began to expand rapidly. Small villages grew into bustling towns, and these larger settlements presented new challenges. How do you organize hundreds, then thousands of people living together? How do you manage large-scale projects, like building irrigation canals to water everyone's fields? This required cooperation on an unprecedented scale. It required leadership. Remember that surplus food we talked about? It did more than just feed a growing population. It created wealth. For the first time, it was possible for some people to accumulate more resources than others. The family with the biggest harvest or the largest herd of cattle had more than just food. They had power. They could trade their surplus for other goods, or they could support people who weren't farmers, craftsmen, priests, and soldiers. This was the beginning of specialization. Not everyone had to be a food producer anymore. You could be a potter, a weaver, a builder. Society was becoming more complex, but this complexity brought a darker side. The surplus that created wealth also created inequality. In hunter-gatherer societies, resources were generally shared, but in these new agricultural communities, a clear hierarchy began to form. At the top were the leaders and the wealthy landowners. At the bottom were those with little or no land, who had to work for others to survive. The very system that provided security for some trapped others in a cycle of labor. Social classes were born. The communal spirit of the nomadic band was replaced by a stratified society of haves and have-nots. Think about the profound psychological shift. Your identity was no longer just tied to your kinship group. It was tied to a place, a piece of property, and your position within a social hierarchy. The horizon of your world shrank from the vast, open landscape to the borders of your village and the edges of your field. Your life became governed by the cyclical rhythms of planting and harvesting. Security increased, yes, but personal autonomy decreased. You couldn't just leave anymore. Your entire support system, your wealth, your very survival was anchored to that one spot on the map. This new way of life also brought new health challenges. While a steady food supply reduced the risk of starvation, the diet itself became far less varied. Hunter-gatherers ate a wide range of plants and animals, providing a broad spectrum of nutrients. Early farmers, on the other hand, often relied heavily on a few staple crops, like wheat, rice, or corn. This monotonous diet could lead to nutritional deficiencies. Furthermore, living in close quarters with both people and domesticated animals created a perfect breeding ground for diseases. Epidemics, which were rare among scattered nomadic groups, became a new and terrifying threat to these dense agricultural settlements. So, was the agricultural revolution a mistake? Some historians have provocatively called it history's biggest fraud. They argue that, for the average person, life actually got harder. They worked longer hours, had a less healthy diet, and were subjected to the rule of elites. It's a compelling argument. The freedom and egalitarianism of the hunter-gatherer life were traded for the drudgery and inequality of the farmer's life. But it's not that simple. Without agriculture, there would be no cities, no writing, no science, no art as we know it. The surplus of food and the specialization of labor are what allowed human civilization to blossom. It freed up human brainpower to focus on things beyond immediate survival. It allowed for the creation of complex societies, governments, and technologies that have led us to the modern world. Every screen you look at, every building you enter, every book you read is a direct descendant of that first seed planted thousands of years ago. The agricultural revolution wasn't inherently good or bad. It was a trade-off. We traded mobility for stability. We traded a varied diet for a reliable one. We traded the egalitarian freedom of the band for the complex hierarchy of civilization. It set humanity on a completely new path, one that brought both incredible achievements and profound challenges. It created the foundations of our modern world, with all its glories and all its problems. The next time you eat a piece of bread or look out at a city, remember the long, complicated, and world-changing journey that began with a single farmer deciding to plant a single seed. It was a choice that made us who we are today. The third topic is the rise of hierarchy. Have you ever wondered why our societies are structured the way they are, with leaders, managers, and bosses? Why isn't everyone just equal? It's a question that takes us back thousands of years to a pivotal moment in human history, a time when our small, tight-knit communities started to grow into something much, much bigger. This is the story of how hierarchy wasn't just invented, but became a fundamental pillar of civilization itself. For hundreds of thousands of years, our ancestors lived in small, mobile bands of hunter-gatherers. In these groups, leadership was fluid. The best hunter might lead the hunt, the wisest elder might settle a dispute, but no one had permanent authority. Decisions were made collectively, and social status was earned, not inherited. Everyone knew each other, and survival depended on cooperation. It was a flat social structure, built on personal relationships and mutual dependence. But then, about 12,000 years ago, something incredible happened. We learned to farm. The agricultural revolution was a game. For the first time, we could produce more food than we needed to eat right away. We created a surplus. This simple fact changed everything. It allowed us to stop wandering and settle down in one place. Small camps grew into permanent villages. Life in these early farming villages was still pretty egalitarian, but the seeds of change were sown. Managing that surplus food became a critical job. Who would store the grain? Who would make sure it was distributed fairly, especially during a bad harvest? Who would keep track of it all? These questions demanded answers, and the answers started to create new roles within the community. As villages thrived, they grew larger and more complex. Some villages blossomed into the world's first cities. Think of places like Uruk in Mesopotamia or Mohenjo-daro in the Indus Valley. Suddenly, you weren't just living with a few dozen relatives, you were living with thousands of strangers. The old ways of making decisions through personal consensus just couldn't work on this scale. Imagine trying to get 10,000 people to agree on where to build a new canal. It would be chaos. This is where leadership began to harden into authority. The need for coordination was immense. Someone had to organize the labor to build and maintain irrigation systems, which were the lifeblood of these new cities. Someone had to plan the construction of massive city walls for defense against raids. Someone had to manage the complex trade networks that brought in essential goods like stone, metal, and wood. These tasks required a new kind of literal central authority figure who could make decisions and see them through. In many early civilizations, this power fell to individuals who were seen as particularly capable, charismatic, or perhaps just ruthless. These were the first chiefs, kings, and pharaohs. Their power wasn't just about making suggestions anymore. It was about giving commands. How did these new rulers solidify their control? Often, they allied themselves with another powerful new force: organized religion. Priests and shamans had always held a special place in society, acting as intermediaries with the divine world. Ascetis grio. So did the pantheons of gods, and the complexity of religious rituals. Rulers often claimed a divine right to rule, suggesting they were chosen by the gods, or were even gods themselves. Think of the Egyptian pharaohs, who were considered living gods on earth. This fusion of political and religious authority was an incredibly powerful tool. If the king's command was also the command of a god, who would dare to disobey? Temples became major economic and administrative centers, reinforcing the king's power and collecting tribute in the name of the gods. This divine backing gave legitimacy to the new hierarchical structure. With this new centralized power came the birth of social classes. Society began to stratify, forming a pyramid shape. At the very top was the ruler and their family. Below them were the elite priests, military commanders, and high-ranking officials who helped administer the state. They lived lives of privilege, benefiting directly from the surplus generated by the mass. Next came a class of skilled artisans, merchants, and soldiers. They had valuable skills that the state needed, giving them a higher status than the vast majority of the population. And at the bottom of the pyramid were the farmers and laborers. These were the people whose hard work created the agricultural surplus that supported everyone else. Their lives were often difficult, filled with toil and obligation to the state. They paid taxes in the form of grain or labor, and for the first time in human history, a large population was living under a system that dictated their lives. A system where the fruits of their labor were controlled by others. This new, organized society needed rules. Personal negotiations and informal customs were no longer sufficient to manage disputes among thousands of people. So, formal laws were created. One of the most famous examples is the Code of Hammurabi from ancient Babylon. It was a detailed set of laws covering everything from property disputes to personal injury. And these laws came with state-enforced punishments. Order was maintained not just by social pressure, but by the threat of official retribution. The rise of hierarchy was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it brought unprecedented coordination and stability. It allowed for the construction of monumental architecture, like the pyramids and ziggurats. It enabled large-scale projects that improved life for many, like irrigation and flood control. It fostered innovation in writing, mathematics, and astronomy, all developed to help manage the complex new state. Civilization, in the sense of an organized, complex society, was born from this structure. But on the other hand, hierarchy created deep and lasting inequality. It separated the rulers from the ruled, the rich from the poor, the powerful from the powerless. For the average farmer at the bottom of the pyramid, life may not have felt like an improvement. They worked harder than their hunter-gatherer ancestors and had less personal freedom. They were vulnerable to the demands of the state and the whims of their rulers. Civilization had become organized, but that organization required control. This new model of society, with its clear chain of command and social stratification, proved to be incredibly effective and resilient. It spread across the globe, and while the specific forms have changed dramatically over the millennia, the basic principle of hierarchy remains a core feature of almost every society on Earth today. From the CEO of a multinational corporation to the president of a country, from the general of an army to the principal of a school. We live in a world shaped by the hierarchies that first emerged in those ancient cities thousands of years ago. Understanding their origin helps us understand the very foundations of our modern world, its incredible achievements, its persistent inequalities, and the constant tension between order and freedom. The fourth topic is safety through control. Have you ever stopped to think about what safety really costs? I mean, really, think about it. For thousands of years, we've been on this quest for security. It started simply enough. Our ancestors built walls, high and strong, to keep danger out. A physical barrier against the unknown, the wild, the hostile. It was a tangible solution to a very real problem. But a wall is just a start, isn't it? Soon, we realized we needed more. We needed people to stand on those walls, to guard the gates, and so, armies were formed. Groups of individuals organized for the collective defense of a territory. This was a huge leap. Safety was no longer just about hiding behind stone. It was about actively pushing back against threats. To protect our homes, our families, our way of life, we needed strength in numbers. We needed a coordinated response. This idea of collective security became the bedrock of society. From there, things got even more complex. As communities grew into towns, and towns into cities, the internal chaos became just as dangerous as the external threats. To manage this chaos, governments were born. They created rules, laws, and regulations designed to bring order. Stop signs, property laws, contracts, all these little pieces of paper were meant to reduce chaos and create a predictable, stable environment where people could thrive without constant conflict. On the surface, It seems like a perfect trade. Civilization offered a shield against the harshness of the world. It promised to reduce risk, to make life less of a gamble. But here's the catch. The part we don't always talk about. This grand project of protection required participation from everyone. You couldn't just enjoy the safety without contributing to it. Suddenly, there were taxes. That money you earned wasn't entirely yours anymore. A portion went to fund the army, to pay the guards, to maintain the very systems that kept you safe. Then there was labor. The walls didn't build themselves. Roads, aqueducts, public buildings, all of this required the sweat and effort of the people. Building a secure society was hard work, and everyone had to chip in. And perhaps the biggest price of all, obedience. To maintain stability, to make the whole system work, people had to follow the rules. They had to obey the laws laid down by the government. The individual, once a free agent responsible only for themselves, now became a small but essential part of something much larger, a vast, structured system. With this shift, the very concept of safety changed. It was no longer just a personal responsibility, something you handled with your own strength or cleverness. Safety became institutional. It was outsourced to the army, the police, the courts. We trusted these institutions to handle the big threats, so we could focus on our daily lives. But think about the paradox here. The more secure a society aimed to be, the more complex and powerful its systems had to become. And these massive, complex systems demand compliance. They need everyone to play their part, to follow the script. The system only works if the individual parts are predictable and reliable. So, what happened to freedom in this new, secure world? Did it just disappear? Not completely, but it definitely changed. It became regulated. Your freedom to do as you please ended where it might infringe upon the safety or rights of others, or where it might destabilize the system itself. You were free, but within a framework of rules. You could drive a car, but you had to stop at the red light. You could own property, but you had to pay taxes on it. Civilization made a promise. It would protect us from the wolves at the door, the external threats that haunted our ancestors, and for the most part, it delivered. But in exchange, it introduced a new set of internal constraints. We traded the fear of the barbarian for the quiet hum of bureaucracy. We traded the chaos of the wild for the order of the rulebook. This isn't a good or bad thing, it's just the trade-off we made. It's the fundamental bargain of civilization. We give up a certain amount of individual autonomy in exchange for collective security. But it's crucial that we never forget the nature of this bargain. We must constantly ask ourselves if the balance is right. How much freedom are we willing to trade for? How much safety? When we look at the world today, with all its intricate laws, global networks, and digital surveillance, we're seeing the ultimate evolution of this ancient trend. The systems of control are more sophisticated than ever. The promise of safety is more alluring than ever. But the cost, the internal constraints, has also grown in ways our ancestors could never have imagined. The wall is no longer just made of stone. It's made of data, of algorithms, of social norms. The army is no longer just men with spears. It's economic policies, international treaties, and digital firewalls. The rules are no longer just chiseled into a stone tablet. They are coded into the software that runs our lives. The question for us, living in this hyper-connected, hyper-regulated world, is the same one our ancestors faced. We look at the walls we've built around ourselves, both physical and metaphorical, and we have to ask, what are we keeping out? And more importantly, what are we locking in? Is the safety we've created worth the control we've accepted? There's no easy answer, but it's a question we should never stop asking. Because the moment we stop questioning the system, the moment we take our safety for granted without considering its costs, is the moment we risk losing the very freedom that makes life worth protecting in the first place. The conversation about safety and control is the ongoing story of humanity. It's a story we are all a part of, and a story we are all still writing. The fifth topic is progress or confinement. Have you ever stopped to wonder if all this, everything around us, is truly progress? Look at the world we've built. Skyscrapers that pierce the clouds, medical marvels that extend our lives, art that captures the soul, and technology that connects us across continents in an instant. It's breathtaking. Civilization is, without a doubt, humanity's greatest project. Our organized societies give us everything from philosophy to space travel. We live longer, safer, and more comfortable lives than any of our ancestors could have ever dreamed of. It's a testament to our collective genius. But have you ever felt trapped? Think about your daily life. The alarm clock that dictates when you wake up. The commute. The 9-to-5 schedule. The bills that never stop coming. We live within a complex web of rules, systems, and structures. We're constantly competing for jobs, for status, for a slightly bigger house or a nicer car. We're tethered to economic and political frameworks that we had no say in creating, but our very survival depends on participating in them. There's this constant pressure, a low-level anxiety that hums in the background of modern life. We've built this incredible, intricate machine, but in the process, have we become just cogs within it? Let's rewind the clock, way back. Imagine the life of an early human. No deadlines, no mortgages, no social media feeds to curate. Their concerns were immediate and tangible: finding food, seeking shelter, avoiding predators. Their life was undoubtedly harder, more dangerous, and much, much shorter. But they possessed a kind of freedom that is almost unimaginable to us now. If a particular group or situation became unbearable, they could, in theory, just walk away. They could venture over the next hill, follow a new river, and start over. Their world was governed by the laws of nature, not the bylaws of a homeowners association. This isn't to say we should all abandon our cities and go live in caves. That's not a realistic or even desirable solution for most of us. The point is to recognize the trade-off we've made. For every bit of security and comfort we've gained, we've surrendered a piece of that primal freedom. We've traded the open wilderness for a gilded cage. A very comfortable, technologically advanced cage with great healthcare and high-speed internet, but a cage nonetheless. The walls aren't made of iron bars. They're made of expectations, debt, and societal norms. The philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau famously wrote, "Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains." He was talking about the social contract. This implicit agreement we have to give up certain freedoms in exchange for the order and protection of society. But did we give up too much? We've engineered away the physical dangers of the wild, only to replace them with the psychological stresses of civilization. Burnout, depression, anxiety, the feeling of being a tiny, insignificant part of a massive, impersonal system. Look at the environmental costs. Our relentless drive for progress, for more, has pushed our planet to the brink. The very systems that provide us with comfort are also poisoning our air and water. It's a profound paradox. The success of our civilization might ultimately be the cause of its undoing. This adds another layer to the feeling of confinement we, re-trapped on a planet that we ourselves are making uninhabitable. There's no new frontier to escape to this time. So, where does that leave us? Is civilization a mistake? Probably not. The advances in medicine, human rights, and knowledge are undeniable achievements that we shouldn't discard. But it's crucial to acknowledge that it wasn't a free lunch. The price was a fundamental shift in what it means to be human. We moved from being wild, autonomous creatures to domesticated, interdependent members of a superorganism. The question isn't how to tear down civilization, but how to make it more humane. How do we reclaim some of that lost freedom within the structures we've built? Maybe it's about finding ways to disconnect, to challenge the constant pressure to produce and consume. Maybe it's about building smaller, more supportive communities within the larger society. It could be about prioritizing mental well-being as much as we prioritize economic growth. Or perhaps it's about redefining what progress even means. Is it just about having more stuff? Or is it about having more time, more connection, and more peace of mind? We are the inheritors of this grand, complicated project. We live in the world that thousands of generations before us built. We enjoy its securities and suffer its constraints. The structures that confine us also protect us. The systems that create pressure also create opportunity. It's a messy, complicated truth with no easy answers. Civilization isn't necessarily a prison with walls and guards, but perhaps it's a labyrinth, one we built ourselves. We gained security, knowledge, and power. But we lost something elemental along the way of freedom that once defined our very existence. Civilization was never a mistake, but we must never forget that it was also never free. What do you think? Have we traded too much freedom for comfort? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. I read every single one. Thanks for watching.